All right. We are going to, as mentioned before, we are for the first time going to cover the Promise Ring, a band from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our first time covering them. Our only album from 1996 as well. 30 Degrees Everywhere. In the opener, you are going to hear a little bit of a picture postcard, or you did hear, I should say, and now you're going to hear a little bit of Everywhere in Denver. Matt, run those numbers for me.
30 Degrees Everywhere by the Promise Ring comes in at number 8,628 in the 1997 Best Ever Albums. Number 928 of 1996. Number 55,620 of all time. It's the Promise Ring's third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1999's Very Emergency and 1997's Nothing Feels Good. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Promise Ring is ranked number 4,712 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
And I know with album titles like that, it's going to be semi-shocking to you guys that this band was one of the forerunners of the emo genre right there in the mid to late 90s. Should we start by actually describing what emo is? Yeah, especially Midwest emo, which is where the Promise Ring comes from. Do I dare give a little bit of a dip into what emo is, or should we stay away from that? What do you think, guys?
No, I mean, you definitely can. Yeah. I think we touched on it when we talked about Sunny Day Real Estate, because that's kind of another band that's in this era that's a progenitor of emo.
So for those that want to kind of just have a really quick view of emo, so is an outgrowth of hardcore. That's the first thing to know, right, is that it comes from the hardcore scene. Of course, hardcore comes from punk. So punk to hardcore spins off into multiple different things, but there's sort of a period between hardcore and emo where bands like Fugazi live, and the Rites of Spring, who we didn't cover, but another sort of famous band. And then from there we get to, Sunny Day Real Estate, who we covered, and then we're in this era that the Promise Ring is in as well, where you've got Jawbreaker, you've got Jimmy Eat World, you've got bands like that, and then shortly afterwards, emo really blows up on the popular level. Yep. I would say around 2001-ish to the mid 2000s is the peak of the commercial viability of it. There were three different major emo scenes. Now, emo was in a lot of different places, but the big areas for it were Washington, D.C., New Jersey, and the Midwestern United States. So there's these three different scenes going on. The DC version of it is much more tied to hardcore, right? And it's earlier, right? So you've things like Bad Brains and Fugazi and stuff, right, are all considered to be the DC scene of emo, right? And then there's a bunch of Minor Threat, even is considered a forefather to it, right? But that's mainly less so the music, I'd say, as opposed to just the confessional nature of what the people are singing in those scenes, right? So that's scene number one. Scene number two of emo comes from New Jersey, and it's the one in between. I think the band that people are most famous with that came out of that is a little bit later, My Chemical Romance. But you've got people like the Gaslight Anthem, which are Springsteen, emo, and stuff like that. Now, in the mid 90s to late 90s, probably the two bands that people would know most would be the Smithereens and the Fountains of Wayne. They come out of the New Jersey scene. And then finally, there's this scene that Promise Ring comes out of, the Midwestern emo scene. That's going to be Sunny Day Real Estate, American Football, who we're going to cover a little bit later, and Promise Ring, and later spins off into bands that sort of still stay scene popular, I'd say, and then can even branch off into things like Fall Out Boy, right, and what's the other 9 in the after Panic at the Disco, right? Can come from that. That's the sonic element of that. So it's important to know the Midwestern version of emo is where this is coming from. How emo is described is a mix of sort of hardcore-esque hardcore-esque music mixed with very confessional or emotional lyrics, both in terms of the tone of the lyrics and also the way the singer is singing the lyrics. There's a lot of focus on alienation. It's introverted, it's yearning, right? It's a lot of talk at times about mental health. It's also a very controversial term. Just about anybody who gets dubbed emo has always hated being called emo, even people in
Right.
the scene, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because really the only time anybody like went full in on emo, like saying they were, was like in the 2010s and 20s after the scene had kind of died, right? Where there wasn't the stigma of being called emo anymore. I guess that happens with every scene once enough time passes, right? That
Right.
like you can be fucking Steely Dan and there's a whole generation of people who are like, oh, Steely Dan's one of the best bands that like they're really cool. And it's like, oh my God, like no one who lived within 25 years of Steely Dan would ever call them cool, right? But you know, you live long enough and ABBA and Steely Dan become cool.
Yep.
You live long enough, people voluntarily start calling themselves emo, right? And that's kind of what the world we're in right now. But that's a little bit of a very, very little overview of like what emo is. All right. So because we're going to be doing a lot of emo, I felt the need to at least kind of cover that because we're heading into peak emo. So the Promise Ring was founded in 1995 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Actually, the members of the group were in other bands that were post-hardcore / proto-emo. I guess that's where we would call this. I did not know that like proto-emo was going back all the way to like the early 1990s. Like I knew about post-hardcore. I think I thought that like emo like developed in the late 90s, you know, as we know it, like this version of it, the Midwestern version of it. But no, it was around a lot longer than that. In 95, the guitarist Jason, so Newikow, it's an interesting spelling if you're looking it up, Gnewikow, and drummer Dan Didier were sort of the core members. They brought in a guitarist, Davey Von Bohlen, which is a fantastic emo guitarist name, and they became a trio, and they were the core members of the group through this run, through the early 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s. The band, while all in Milwaukee, Matt Mangan, another member of the band, moves to Indianapolis after helping to form the band, and that's when Davey Von Bohlen comes in because he's Mangan's replacement. And like I said before, they moved from like a 4-piece to a 3-piece at this point. They were all friends and they just started playing music and gigging together. They'd all been a member of bands, so they kind of knew what they were doing. They went on a 10-day tour of the East Coast early in their run, which allowed them to sort of network in those other scenes that we talked about. And eventually they find their way to a 7-inch vinyl single through the album Foresight Records. That was basically a label that was owned by a friend of theirs, and they began touring in, you know, small venues. It's described as basements, like, you know, even things like VFW halls and church, you know, basements and stuff like that is where they're going. And just word of mouth starts to spread that they're a good live show. They start to get a dedicated, albeit small, audience that can sustain them a little bit. It leads to another EP called The Falsetto Keeps Time, and something called a split single. Have you guys ever heard of a split single before?
No.
Yes.
Isn't that when they share it? They have a song and another band has a song and they put it out together?
Yep.
Yeah.
You got it, Matt. Exactly right. Split singles and split EPs are sort of like what I think of as compilations, but much smaller form, and usually groups bundled together because they either have a similar sound or a similar aesthetic. So they're just touring in like super underground at this point. And they released the album 30 Degrees Everywhere, this album, in September 1996. I'll go a little bit into like what led up to that, but I first should bring up that the band themselves does not like this record. They are very much on the record as saying it was recorded in 5 days. They felt that like they didn't have a clear vision of like what the album was supposed to sound like, and kind of almost viewed how it's described as they almost view this as like a rough draft of their sound, and they also are pretty much all vocal about not liking the engineering and production on this album. In fact, Bolan goes so far as to say it was the wrong recording at the wrong time with the wrong person, would be how he described this album. However, despite his views and the band's views on it, the album itself was a success in the underground emo, or whatever we want to call post-hardcore was another term they were using for this at the time, but post-hardcore emo, there's a lot of other terms. It wasn't really named yet, but in that scene, which had as you would imagine from emotional music, right? It had people that were very emotionally connected to it, and it drew them a pretty good audience that allowed them to make Nothing Feels Good, an album that sold better, got more acclaim, and in terms of sales and notice from critics, and kind of broke them as much as the Promise Ring were to break in this moment of time. So they sold 4,000 copies of this album prior to its release, which is charming in its own way, isn't it? Because it was considered a success, but 4,000, in the year of our Lord,
yeah,
1996,
really.
makes you
hand,
very, very,
at
yeah,
shows.
Correct. And that's basically where they're selling this ahead of time. So, but like I said, I would describe this album as this is the album that broke them in many ways. It went from 4,000 to 12,000 copies within a year sold, and it also, most notably, got them attention from the press, and that led to them being way more covered, a better A&R budget, and it sort of broke them to the next stage of their career, I would say. So I can add in some other facts along the way about their story afterwards. They periodically get back together to tour and play individual shows. They do go on releasing albums in their first run till 2002. That is when they disband. But they, like I said, they've done a one-off show in 2005 in Chicago. They played 2 reunion shows in 2011. They played a bunch of festivals and shows in 2012. And on New Year's Eve 2015, they played the Nothing Feels Good album in its entirety, and also made another appearance in 2016 at a festival. So they kind of bring it back together again, and kind of field test it, which is nice. So I would say they're not active, but they've played recently enough and play, I guess, regularly enough from time to time that they're considered to still be semi-active. In terms of whenever they all feel like it, they just get together. But I would say disbanded, effective 2016 for real, but we'll call them semi-active. All right, Josh, you're the emo kid of the show, right? Right here.
Totally.
What'd you think of this one? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always knew Promise Ring by name. I never went back and listened to them. I definitely listened to emo in that period that you listened to in the 2000s, and like Get Up Kids, that would also be like a Midwestern emo probably band. I wasn't a huge Dashboard Confessional fan, but they're also like kind of a big emo name from later on. I feel like the band does about this album. I did not like the production on this at all. I did not find the lo-fi nature of it charming in any way. I found it distracting. I feel like, I don't know if this is a hallmark of emo or just this band, but the lead singer's voice is pretty weak and strained a lot of the time. This gets into kind of like the post-hardcore scene as well, where you don't necessarily have to have a good voice, but I found it distracting for this band. This also gets into like the screamo subgenre of emo that comes where you can also just like scream and get away with it and not have a necessarily good voice. It did remind me of bands that I like more, like Thursday later on and things like that would also probably be in the emo genre. I did like certain parts of this album. I feel like they do have kind of right from the jump with the song that you put on Everywhere in Denver. That's kind of the
Everywhere in
opening first track. They do have kind of a way of, they grab me right away with kind of their rhythm and melody that they have on a lot of these songs. I did appreciate that fact. I think the guitars are pretty good, but there is something, I feel like the nostalgia that I have for emo, I don't have nostalgia for emo anymore. It's not a genre that I go back and listen to. And so when I hear something like this that sounds so reminiscent of what I listen to, I kind of have, I don't really have affection for it in the same way that I do with other genres. I find it hard to, I just feel like in some ways I was a different person than I am now, musically. And so, and this is kind of how I felt, I think I was a bit underwhelmed when we talked about the Sunny Day Real Estate album as well. There were things I liked about it, but it wasn't working for me in the same way that it did for you guys, if I remember. And this album just didn't grab me in the way I hoped. I always think when I know a band by name that it's going to be kind of a hidden gem. We always talk about that. But this did not fit the bill for me this week on that. There is, for being like 36 minutes, I found it, the album kind of samey sounding throughout. I kind of lost the thread of which songs stood out for me, and that was a detriment also. And ultimately, this album ultimately didn't really work for me. It may have been the headspace that I was in this week, but I feel like I responded a lot more to some of the other albums this week, or more strongly at least. And so yeah, this was a little bit of a disappointment for me this week.
This is I am very upset and torn on this record.
You're emo?
No. Well, musically, I'm emo. I mean, musically, and even the production, I see what you're saying about the production, but musically, I'm very interested in what's happening here, right? And it starts from the get-go with Everywhere in Denver. Just that guitar part comes in, the dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
and I'm okay, I'm in. You got me. Like, in 2 seconds, I'm like, all right, where are you going with this?
Right.
And there were several parts of this throughout. I like how there's parts where it goes full-blown, full band, and then it slows down to just a guitar part that kind of like, takes it in a little bit of a different direction. There's a little bit of a proggy nature, I think, to some of these types of songs, and I felt similar to Sunny Day Real Estate because of that full-blown emotional, explosion, and then kind of like bringing it down, and then to, developing this part to go in this direction, and then bringing it back,
Building up again.
Totally. And there's lots of cool parts like that peppered throughout this entire record. It is a little bit samey, but I think musically I'm on board for this. I hate the vocals. Like the vocals, the more that he sang, the more I got just, and that doesn't happen very often, but I got turned off. It was just such a barrier for me. It's a weak, whiny, out of tune, kind of just this high pitched, like off-putting vocal. And ordinarily I'm okay with like weird vocals. Like I love Tom Waits, I love Bob Dylan, right. I even like Jeremy Enoch's voice from Sunny Day Real Estate. Now that took some time for me to get into, but and there are some similarities between his vocal styling and this guy here. But this was just, I don't know, it was just really hard. And by the time I got to like the 8th or 9th track, I was just like, can this end? I just wanted this, okay, I got it. I'm done, and I'm upset by that because like I said, I think musically there's a lot for me to really enjoy here. But it's really is his vocal style is just, it's just, I don't think it's very good at all. It's distinctive, but it's not terribly interesting. To me, it just sounds bad.
Right.
And so I think that this could have been better if it was a different, and I know emo is kind of like that. A lot of, as soon as he started singing, I'm like, right, that's the kind of emo vocal styling, the high pitched, kind of whiny.
Definitely whiny.
You know, sometimes off key type thing.
Right.
And I think in some variations with that, I can be okay with it, but like this was not one of them. I thought it was, and by the same token, I thought something was wrong with my audio in my car when I've heard the first song, because when he started singing, it was so pushed back that I was like, wow, that's weird. Like, I can barely hear what he's saying, which is interesting for a genre that the lyrics are supposed to resonate so much with people, because you can't really hear the vocals because they're so pushed back, and he's whining so much that I couldn't even understand them if they were. So it's like, this is like an album that you would have to, in order to know the words, you'd have to like read along with them to try to figure out what he's saying. I don't know. You must have amazing ears to be able to decipher what he's saying here. So for a genre that the lyrics are supposed to be they're supposed to resonate so much with people, it's interesting that I find it really hard to pick apart anything that he's really saying. So I got to go thumbs down on this, and I really hate doing it. And normally I think unique vocal stylings I'm okay with, or find some value in that. I just by the end of this record, I was like, I can't get past this. Like, I just think it's terrible. I think his voice is terrible, and I hate being that definitively negative on it, but it's how I felt. I lost interest in it, which is a shame, because right from the get-go I was like, I'm gonna love this album, and then I went from that to I think I kind of hate this album. And so that was kind of a unique listening experience. So yeah, I'm not terribly happy that I feel this way about it, but that's what it is. So yeah, it's I don't know, maybe if they're so not into their production, maybe I can go back and try to listen to, what is it, Nothing Feels Good, the top album on this list, or maybe Very Emergency, maybe one of their later albums I would find a little bit more in. But unless he changes his vocal style, if he can clean that up a little bit, which I don't know if he does. I think that's kind of the vibe that they're going for.
Right.
It's probably not going to be something that lands for me in other albums either. So
you'll just be able to hear it better later.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe hate it even more. So yeah, I'm sorry. I got to go thumbs down on this.
I listened to a couple songs on later albums, and it is a little bit less abrasive, Matt, for what it's worth.
Okay.
In terms of the songs I heard, I have very similar thoughts to you, Matt, on this one in terms of my view on this album. Emo's an interesting one for me. I almost don't like to use it because it's infused into lots of different things. Some I like and some I don't. For me, this takes a lot from Fugazi, who I really like quite a bit, but I'm going to say something that hopefully doesn't come off the wrong way. I like a more masculine version of like this type of music, a deeper voice, more if you're going to have like not a great voice, like I need you to have like a little bit more bass in your voice, when you're gonna like come at me, because the loud version of this type of like off tune yearning sound is not a appealing sound to my ears. And you're right, Matt, it is a grating sound to my ears. Unlike you, there are other grating sounds. It kind of ruined the Sunny Day Real Estate album for me as well. I was on the record as saying I was very much in the middle on that album for similar reasons as to this one, but I don't get graded by things like Fugazi or Minor Threat or stuff that are harsher thing. I don't know what it is. I feel the emotion there, but I guess it's like the emotion's anger and frustration, so it comes out a little bit more than yearning does.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, there's an evolution of this type of emo that I like later in things like AFI or My Chemical Romance, right? The difference is the lead singer can fucking sing. And like as a result,
it's a big difference.
It does, and what it does is it doesn't like destroy the guitar parts that I like. And and I wouldn't necessarily say like Fugazi, for example, has like the most beautiful lyrics, but there's never a barrier to listening to like Fugazi play for me ever, right? With the lyrics, I listen to the lyrics quite a bit. I'm interested. It kind of complements what they're going for in all the Fugazi that we've done. This, like, immediately the vocals are a barrier. I would also say that the fact that all of the songs kind of follow the exact same template does make that, was it 39 minutes? I think it was like around, 37 minutes. It really does make it drag. You're right, Matt. There are interesting syncopated guitar parts here that share quite a bit with hardcore and with punk lines. They're a little bit more complex than hardcore lines, but kind of like a little bit more complicated punk would be how I'd describe the guitar stylings here. Indie rock adjacent that are interesting. You wouldn't even know what the drums sound like because the vocals are pushed back and the drums are pushed back. The mix is brutal. And I like lo-fi, but this isn't like lo-fi. This is like amateur hour. So even before I heard the band shit all over the production, I can't say I didn't come to the same exact conclusion. It's even if this were good. But then I got to thinking, like, if the lyrics weren't pushed back on this, could you imagine if the lyrics were out front on this?
Yeah, it would be terrible.
So
it would be worse.
Maybe the guy did that. Maybe the guy did that on purpose.
He knew.
Did him a favor and he knew what it sounded like. And maybe also think, like, what's the drumming on this album like? Because you barely hear it. And there is a part of me that thinks, like, did he say the guitar parts are the best part of this album, right? So if we do that and you can kind of hear him, warbling in the background, you'll get the emo feel of it. And it's the best thing. So maybe that was a choice that had some wisdom to it, but it certainly doesn't sound good because you get the worst of both worlds, right? The lyrics, the vocals still aren't great, but the sound is, so muddled that to the point of almost like incomprehensible. So I'm with you, Matt. I have to give this a thumbs down. I see bits and pieces of this that if they develop like I think they did, and they start to sound more like some of their Midwestern, peers and kind of sing a little bit more traditionally, I could see how I would like this type of album a lot more, but this ain't it for me this week. So
did you mention, I have this up on Wikipedia. Did you mention that that Bolan was sick during the time that he made this?
I did not. Yeah. That explains why too.
Bolan was ill during the making of it, resulting in issues with his vocals. Yeah, no shit. Okay. So maybe he doesn't sound that bad, but I would listen to one of the other ones, though.
I could definitely say on the second and third album, where I listened to the most listened to tracks, he definitely has a cleaner sounding voice. Okay. It's definitely more dashboard conventional than this, I would say. Now, whether or not that works for you, you can have your own mileage vary, but that's what I'd say it sounds a little bit more like.
All right, good to know.